everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Black Social Capital Podcast. We're going to dive right in because we have an exciting guest that we want you to meet today. Today's guest is Dr. Mohagany Borrayo-Gilchriest. Dr. Mahogany is an accomplished professional in the field of education with a strong focus in educational leadership, departmental management, and student affairs. She holds a doctorate of education and a master's of education from USC, the University of Southern California. She holds a bachelor's of arts degree from Caldwell University in history. Dr. Mahogany has been actively involved in speaking engagements and educational research, focusing on topics such as career exploration, the development of student athletes, the employability of Black male student athletes specifically. She also is committed to empowering students and advocating for their rights, and her work has had a lasting impact on the institutions and communities that she has served. Welcome, Dr. Mahogany.
Hello, how y'all doing?
We good. I'm super excited to chat with you today. One, because this is a almost like a throwback episode for the podcast. We started with higher ed, so like talking to higher ed professionals is always exciting for me. But more importantly, Dr. Mahogany is one of the best to ever do it. I done seen her hustle on campus, connect students to resources, build communities, and speak when people need to be spoken to. So I'm excited to dive into your philosophies, your ways, and I wanna take some notes. So I'm gonna step out the way and let Dr. Jackie kick us off with some questions.
Yeah. So we want to start off with questions about education. Let's talk about your research, your doctoral research. What was the topic? How did you become interested in it?
Well, thank you, both of y'all, one for having me. Before I kind of dive into that, and Theo, all of those that positive reaffirmation of all the work that I do, kind of makes me blush a little bit. But my doctoral research actually focused on Black male student athletes in the Power Five conferences, which are the major conferences that you usually see on TV. So like the USC's, UCLA's, Colorado's. I'm naming all of the Pac-12 folks that are leaving.
Yeah, about to be a power two in a second.
A
So
power two, but like the West Virginias and schools like that, and UNC, University of North Carolina, and their career exploration and how their academic preparation kind of prepared for that. How I actually became interested in that really is kind of like a whirlwind that starts in my undergrad year. I went to school in Missouri, and that's actually where I met my partner, who was an athlete at the time, a student athlete, played football. And along with one of the defensive football coaches, I actually started a tutoring service in undergrad for some of the football guys that were having a hard time. It was a great way for community service. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my own career yet. So my sophomore year, I was like, okay, I could do this. I had been teaching my whole life. I'm the oldest of six, so I can tutor, some young Black fellas with different topics in college. This is way in the early 2000s, and
shout out to the early 2000s, y'all.
early 2000s when we wore big T-shirts and listened to Gucci Mane faithfully. Uh, but kind of fast forwarding. I knew that education was something that I wanted to get into, but I kind of put the student athlete lens on pause. And I thought I was going to be a museum curator. And I saw how much they made. And I was like, you know what? I don't know if this is going to be the career for me, putting up, paintings and curating. So I'm going to teach history. They also lied to me about the salary there too. So I went into teaching and I taught for some time. And those student athletes found their way back into my classrooms, where I actually wrote the curriculum and taught for their career training and technical education in Patterson Public Schools, and built really great partnerships with pretty prestigious institutions across the East Coast, secondary institutions, to kind of showcase that there were so many careers that you could have in sports that doesn't necessarily mean you being an athlete. I did that for about 7 years, and one day I was kind of sitting. I was pretty comfortable in my role. I was writing curriculum. I was leading a team, And I meditated over it, and I said, God, if it's meant for, I was on the East Coast at the time. And I said, God, if it's meant for me to go back to California, which is where I'm from, at that point I was married, I had a baby. I was like, make it easy. And I applied to, at the time, what was the Ivory Tower for me growing up as a LA kid, USC, one school. Um, I got in and I was like, okay, they say God moves slow, but this was a quick answer. Uh, and I ended up getting involved with athletics there. Um, and through that, I kind of just was germinating when I was thinking about getting my doctorate while in my master's program of like, what do I want to study and how would I want this work elevated across educational systems and not just in post-secondary. Because I come from those two different lenses of post-secondary and K-12 and working in the nonprofit sector. So like, how can I inform this work and be a leading voice in a community that often isn't led by folks that look like the people that are being heavily impacted by policies and protocols that are, relayed to them.
Man, so a couple things that I think right off the top. Um, One, you talked about the transition from, or talking about the different areas that people can get into outside of the athlete portion, right? And I think that's something to spend some time on too, to talk about what's that mindset shift potentially between someone that has been on the field or playing their sport, and then having them think about something tangential or related. Did you find any like rough edges around that, or hard transition around that? What were some of your ways to help people kind of cope with that transition?
Absolutely. I think, in America, Biggie said it best. There's only three pipelines of which that you can go, right? And one of them being, being an athlete. And for a lot of times in Black households, and I want to get away from only focusing on low socioeconomic households where Black athletes, particularly when we're talking about males, that it's only the poor Black single family household Black male that is, propelled into sports. You see it across all spectrums. Mm-hmm. I think that the lens looks a little different when you move toward the middle class household, because there is the conversation of a backup plan because they see it in their community and their household. But that doesn't mean that the hyperfixation or hyperfocus of them being an athlete first isn't something that just kind of misses them, right? So when I kind of put that imagery out there for folks, I really get frustrated. I'm just to be honest with you, I get very frustrated professionally because I'm like, you're focusing on a very deficit mindset and focus that I think the media likes to portray, that a lot of our young Black men and young Black women have to continuously combat. And it's like, we do not all come from poverty. And to be fair, those of us that are, impacted by poverty is not by circumstances of our own that we've created. Like, let's really get into it. I was a history teacher for many years, so I get into that often when I talk about it, but it is very difficult because it is a lens and an identity that for most, especially during my research, I found for most of them, it starts between the ages of 7 and 8. So from 7 to 8, you're 10 years into this ideology of who you are supposed to be and who you're meant to be by the time you enter college, your first year of college. So when I was teaching in high school, I was getting students about 15 to 18. So I would really sit and ask them. We would have kind of Socratic conversations about, in the Socratic method, where we're sitting in a circle and we're just thinking about thinking, right? Of why do you want to be an athlete? What about that makes you feel good? What about that is appealing to you? Is it the idea of play? Is it the idea of, like kind of just throwing out these different things for them? Again, I was teaching in Patterson Public Schools at the time. I might be aging myself, but oh well, because I'm aging like fine wine these days. But I taught at the infamous East Side High, which the movie Lean on Me was based on.
East Side.
By that side.
Y'all ain't ready.
So it wasn't in a low socioeconomic community. And for a lot of these babies, and I call them babies, they are all adults, young adults, emerging adults, but they're my babies. Oh, well. Um, but a lot of these babies, it was just getting out of poverty. It was the ability to be able to remove their intimate household out of the situation that they were in. What I found was that, and even through my research, that for them, this is like a job. Very seldom is it fun anymore. And I was like, well, what's the point if you're not having fun? Like the object of this is to be fun. Wow. So if it's no longer fun, why are we doing it? And it was often hyper fixated on like really taking care of their community. So that social capital, that community capital, that social cultural capital is really important. I want to just get my family out of this situation. I want us to be able to live the way that we deserve to live and not the way in which that's been imposed on us. So I actually, once I was able to kind of gather that information, we were doing real bare minimum bare scale research at this point, right? In a classroom, I put up the average salary of a what we would call like their franchise player. So a non-franchise player, their salary at the time, again, we're talking in the early 2010s now, is $95K. And then I would put up the salary of the doctor. At the time, they had their medical doctor, their psychology doctor, their trainers, their front office staff, their general managers. So I'm putting all these people's salaries on my whiteboard. And I'm also offering the lifespan or the career span of each of those roles. And I'm like, do you see how much these folks make over X amount of years compared to the 2 to 3 years that this athlete does? And you're responsible for your own insurance. You're responsible for all of these and listing these things off. And for them, they're like, wait, that's not a lot of money. I said, it's not. So really, sometimes you have to really show folks that it's really the people behind the scenes are the ones that are actually making the big money if you're not a franchise player. And even those franchise players, when you break it down, they're not really making that much. Then when you conflate, and I kind of bringing in the work that I'm doing now, a lot of these students being first gen students, right? So being first gen, meaning that you're the first person in your family to go to college. As a student athlete, dependent upon your sport, and typically those that are revenue generating, those that a lot of Black folks are in, which are football and basketball, you have to attend a post-second institution. For basketball, I believe it's 1 year. For football, it's a minimum of 3.
Can I ask a quick question? Because you said I don't know sports. I'm sorry. What's a franchise player?
So franchise player is the face player. So think Patrick Mahomes, think Brett Favre, think Aaron Rodgers, think Randall Cobb.
Dr. Jackie to think about people she don't even know.
So these are folks.
Let's say think Michael Jordan. Think
Michael
Kobe
Jordan.
Bryant.
Yes.
See, there you go. See, Jack say, "Oh yeah, I heard of them."
These are folks that you immediately think of when you think of that particular sport. So for baseball, it would be Aaron Judge, who plays for the Yankees. So it's someone that, if you don't know anything about sports, Michael Jordan. Oh, what team did he play for? The Bulls. Like even though he played for other teams, you automatically associate him with a particular franchise.
Look, Chicago better stand up. We don't count that other stuff. All right, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it.
But yes, those are what your franchise players are. They're basically the folks who are the most well known, and who a franchise, who a team puts a lot of their money behind to carry their team.
Thank you,
LeBron James.
Okay.
Look at that. You know what's funny is that I actually had a conversation, was part of a dialogue not too long ago with one of our previous guests, Dr. Rima, and she has an amazing conference, the Centering Black Children in Education Conference. It's a virtual conference that happens every year. And in one of her recent panels, she had a conversation with someone that was talking about sport and our students. And she calls her students babies and kids as well. And the other person on the panel was like, I understand, but also our athletes don't get that opportunity to just be in their kiddom, right? Like, you know, especially when you talk about student athlete, we want to put the student first, but you know, there's so many pressures around the athlete portion and so many other things that they have to deal with that, you know, your person that's 18, 19, 20 is dealing with 25, 26, 27-year-old problems, right? Or 30-year-old problems. So it's interesting to hear you talk about, you know, some of those navigation issues and learning about the systems behind the sport, which is super interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's really important to make those connections to humanize these young folks, right? Because they're not just these continuous engines that are going to keep going. They're humans. They're people. They have feelings, and we don't consider that sometimes because we're only focusing on their talent rather than them as people. You know.
So, what happens? Like, what do you believe happens for them in their minds when you show them all of that?
What I believe happens, and what I from what I've observed as well. So not only through my belief, but also what I've seen when working with these young folks, is that the world opens up for them. Um, a lot of things I will find. So I told you my first love was actually going to be an art curator, right, in education. Um, I'm very visual, so I try to create visuals for folks because that's how my brain operates. When I'm stressed, I draw or I paint, right? So I try to offer that piece of myself into these spaces. And what I have found with art is that it opens up your mind to what the possibility is. So I try to create that in an educational space, whether it be in a classroom or in the space that I oversee now at the institution that I work at. Is I want you to see that beyond what's in front of you and what's been presented to you, that there are so many avenues um, that you could pierce and be impactful and still be interfaced with the things that you love, right? Um, I use the example of I didn't get to curate museums, but I was able to curate people because every little brushstroke of intellect or something that I've added to your life, you're a walking personified canvas that I get to add to the world. And that's what I want for these young folks to take with them as well is you are a brushstroke for folks. And I want you to walk into that light with that of the world is so big. Um, for some of the students, I think it really helped them understand that I'm being played if I'm only going this route. If I'm not going to be the star player,
Yep.
I'm really not going to make that much. And I'm going to go back into this cycle of poverty, if not only in mindset, but in reality, because $95,000 in the 2010s wasn't a lot. It's showing a lot in 2020, in the 2020s, right? So and I break that down for them. What does that mean when you were entering the world and you're a first gen student, right?
Mm-hmm.
First gen students are all actually walking into their career world, not just thinking of themselves, but also thinking of the community that supported them through that process. So I'm making 95K, but I know that I'm going to have to be a financial springboard for this person. I may also need to be a support person for this person. So where does that leave me in the end? And I say this to students now: if you are going to school and you are going to a school that is highly selective, y'all picking up what I'm putting down, and you're graduating with a master's degree, you should not take any job that's making less than six figures. That institution has done a disservice to you if you can only get a job that pays you less than six figures, right? So I try to really create this mindset, particularly for students of color that come from low socioeconomic households, to really consider that as well. Because if we have to navigate a capitalistic system, we need to also center the way in which we navigate our careers in that way as well. And I think that for Black and brown folks, particularly those from low socioeconomic communities, we're not taught that. We're taught to do what we love, do it for the passion. Well, passion don't pay bills.
Right.
And
is
I
how
want
you get taken advantage of.
exactly. And that's, I think, to center back to your question, that's where I always center those conversations of I want you to see more than just being on TV and people loving you because you're famous and you're somebody that they can be adjacent to and feel that when you're still struggling. I want you to think beyond the physicality of things and understand that there is so much more game underneath that carpet that I need you to start exploring.
So how does that translate? Because when I hear you say like it changes their mindset, you're trying to help them understand like you could just be a cog in this capitalistic system, or you can find out how to be a player and to actually have the system meet your needs. So when I hear you say that, the first thing that comes to my mind is major selection. So maybe instead of these general sets of majors that athletes might go into, which has been my experience, like there's certain majors that they would select so that they had maybe a little bit more space to focus on like their job, which is athletics, right? But now instead of going into these majors so that they could have the time to prioritize athletics, they're going into these they're trying to figure out what major do I actually need so that, you know, this might be plan A, but I have a for real plan B now. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So when you when we talk about the types of majors, so in my research, I had a participant, 1 to 2 participants from each of the conferences. So there are 65 schools within the Power 5 conference. I had up to 2 individuals from each conference. So if you were in the Big 12, I had someone that was in the Big 12 conference and possibly someone else that was also in that conference at a different school, right? When we talk about major selection, it's really interesting. I want to center back on that first gen identity for a second, because of my participants, half of them identified as first gen students. A lot of folks don't even understand what a major is, right? So when you're walking this young individual through the process and they're like, okay, NCAA mandates that you need to have a major by this point at this time in your program. What major do you want? It seems to me, as a person who is not within athletics, who is sitting in the outskirts as an observer, very predatory. When we're not explaining what majors are, how majors directly correlate to your overall economic capital and expertise and skill set post athletic career, right? So I don't know if it's being conveyed in what I'm saying, but institutions need to do better in the same way that they recruit, that they are also explaining to these categorically community of students who are far more strategically aligned to get a degree in the timeline that it's meant to be getting. It's supposed to have had. And what I mean is your non-athlete student has up to 6 years to get a degree before their catalog theoretically gets updated. They are kind of aware of what kind of major they want. They sit with their academic advisor. They have the opportunity to kind of explore. They don't necessarily have to choose a major by a particular time frame, though it is heavily conveyed that you need to have one at least by the second half of your sophomore academic year. Where in athletics, it is a very firm, you need to have this major by this point. It is NCAA mandated. You're meeting with an athletic academic advisor and your academic advisor, which sometimes those two communities are clashing. So there are far more political and strategic ways in which that you can support ensuring that these students are actually getting degrees that will be of use to them when they graduate. I'm not saying that a comm and a journalism degree, which I'm not going to speak to whether or not that's what you're alluding to, but in my research, that was a lot of what I saw my participants were getting, were communication degrees. Well, research has shown, and I can name research article after research article after research article, and I can talk to every dean, I think, across the United States in a renowned journalism and communication school, that if you're not getting internships in some kind of comm field, you just have a comm degree. It is heavy network based. You need to be able to interface with an internship. You need to be able to actually develop that social capital so that you can elevate yourself in these spaces to make this comm degree useful.
You, you know,
So,
you know what's interesting? You know what's interesting is as we bring up comms, right? It brings up a lot of things for me, right? Because in sport, so much of it is communication, right? It's the before you start to play. It's the halftime interview. It's the post game interview. It's the people that are interviewing you. It's the media company. It's the PR company. All these things are comm related, but uh, so many of our athletes get caught up in the web of miscommunication. It's like you got a comm degree, but you get caught up in the miscommunication scandal, right? Or they're making choices that if they get to that next level, uh, just make it more difficult to navigate, right? So I think it's interesting that you start off with this potential opportunity that could be useful to you, but then it gets mismanaged down the line, or you're not able to dedicate that time to it that other students have as well, right? So I
you
think
also
that's
have to,
super. Yeah, go ahead.
absolutely, I'm gonna jump in, but you also have to learn too about how to elevate your skill set, right? That's where that career development comes in, of knowing how to elevate the skill set that you have into a resume, right? Where you can flip these interviews, these halftime. I know that the Pac-12, for instance, does a big Pac-12 conference media day. You can utilize that as real time skill set as an intern adjacent type of program of, well, I was a part of this Big 12 media day where I was able to talk to reporters and build those relationships and understanding the power of networking. But for them, they're not, from my experience and through the research, a lot of them didn't think about their skills in a way that was useful to them outside of, I am an athlete, right? Um, Through this work, I've helped a lot of student athletes with resumes. It is profoundly concerning how many student athletes that are in revenue generating sports programs that don't have resumes or, you know, architectural cover letters. And what I mean by that is like a bare bone cover letter to be able to kind of build upon as they're applying for jobs, right? Um, how many of them are graduating without them? And I was like, and an institution across the spectrum is only, and I'm going to repeat this several times, is only as useful and as resourceful and as impactful as the jobs that their graduates are getting. That is one of the main markers of what makes an institution worth going to. What is going to be the social capital and the economic capital that I'm going to be able to um, gain from attending this prestigious institution? Um, and if you're leaving that institution not making any money, why go to school anyway, right? Is what a lot of the theoretical background comes from that, right? Of I'm going to school so that I'm able to elevate myself. But if you're graduating, you don't even have a resume, like that's concerning, that's alarming, right? No college student should ever leave college without a resume, period, at all. That should be standard. But when I was helping them write their resumes, and I'm like, well, what are your skills? Well, I don't have any skills except for playing football. Well, no. You were able to make real-time decisions within a split second. You're able to strategically think about how you're going to approach this opponent. And that changes week by week. You're able to build team communities. You're able to communicate effectively across broad spectrums. You're able to convey your skill set to coaches and teams through your work ethic. Like being able to develop even that lexicon is one of those ways. I think, going back to Dr. Jackie's question earlier, how do you open up their brain? Being able to teach them that you actually have these skills, but them not knowing that these skills even exist because they've never had to utilize that piece of that skill set to advocate for themselves. You know what I mean?
But it's Look, if y'all didn't just take notes on what you about to update your resume to, hey, well, you better rewind it.
And I think that translates not just for student athletes, right? I think it's a pretty universal experience that first gen students have. And I mean, all students probably do have that. They have to learn, like, how do I use my skills to advocate for myself? But I think it's especially so for your first gen who are like, I didn't have anyone that thought to even explain that to me on the fly, whether I was ready to receive it or not, right? There was no like parent or, guidance counselor particularly, right? That was like, all right, so when you go to college, think about doing these things so that when you get into your interviews after college, you can talk about these types of things and answer these types of questions.
Absolutely. As of I am a first gen student, I'm also a transfer student. I live in a lot of little households of intersectionalities, and it really took for me to observe how my wealthy non first gen counterparts were navigating collegiate spaces in order for me to be successful. Because during this time, we're also talking about the early 2000s, being a first gen student at that time, and I'm just being very honest, was something to hide. You didn't want to let people know that you were first gen because you just wanted to be in it. I think we're in the piece of an education where, and I'm gonna just be real, and I need folks to understand this, especially families of first gen students. This is a business. I do not care how much they tell you how much they care. I do not care how much they tell you that they're going to care for your child. I do not care if they are telling you how impactful and how resourceful they're going to be for your child. This is still a business. Higher education in and of itself is a business. And understanding that model, there's a lot of authority that you have as a student and as a family of a student because you are the consumer. So you are able to tell said business what they need to do to earn your patronage. Excuse me. Yes, your patronage, your service, your money. Um, so if someone is telling you, I'm going to be able to provide these things for your students so that they are employable and highly employable, how? I want you to show me the numbers of how that happens. What are some programs that you run to actually prepare my student to propel them into corporate America if that's the route that they're going? It's really about asking those questions because if not, they're going to rock you to sleep with all of the shiny objects and the beautiful offices that they have. And we're able to build community. Community is great, but what else are you doing to ensure that this X $100,000 degree is actually worth it and that we're actually going to get the return on the investment that we're making? Because those loans are an investment. That debt you're putting in is an investment. How is this institution going to ensure that I'm going to get a return back on that investment? If it cost you $80,000 to get this degree, then any career that you're looking at should be able to double what it cost you to get that degree. Do you pick up what I'm putting? And the reality is that folks of color, we tend to go into degrees of service. So education, social work, those historically have not been careers you can get a return on your investment, i.e. a high salary with just a bachelor's degree. You got to go back for a master's and a doctorate. So now you're looking at $80,000 to $300,000. How are you going to ensure as an institution, right, that this person is not going to end up owing more than what they're actually making in a salary? And those are the questions that I want you as a first gen community to start asking. What are the scholarships that you offer for first gen students? How am I eligible for these scholarships? What are some ways in which that the school ensures that that debt to cost ratio is lower? What makes your institution better than going to, say, a public school where the degree is cheaper? Why would I go to this 4-year institution to do all 4 years if I can do it at a community college and pay nothing and transfer in? Like, I want us as first gen professionals to really, as first gen, students, to really start to explore, kind of ticking at that board of how do I stagger so that this becomes a low cost for me in the long run?
So So when is that? So you just gave some dope tips, right? I'm like, look, parents, you better be listening to the podcast too. So when does this process of like figuring out schools and all that type of thing work? Because I know that sometimes we just be picking to be picking. Somebody said I should go to school, so here we go. This one's close to the house, or I heard about this school. They got a cool football team, or they got a cool band, or I just want to be away. Like, when do you think people should really be starting to take a look at schools to help make these choices? Because you just listed off some great things, but it sounds like it's gonna take a minute.
Absolutely. I think that for me in my household, I have an 8-year-old. We start early. What do you want to be when you grow up? My daughter has consistently stated that she wants to be in the sciences, either as a paleontologist and not an astronomer, excuse me. She's going to kill me if she ever sees this. I don't want to be an astronomer, an astronaut, and most recently an architect, which is STEM-ish, STEM adjacent. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, let's start looking at different schools that have that. For a long time, my daughter wanted to go to USC because both her father and I are grad alum from there, right? And I was like, well, let's think about it. What programs do they have that actually feed into what it is that you want to do? A lot of it really is you have to talk to your scholar to see where their mind is, and you're gonna have to pick up the pieces, even if you don't know. It's a Google search. Everything is Googleable. I don't even know if Googleable is a word, but it should be. Everything is Googleable, right? And as a parent, it is incumbent upon us to explore if our child is hinting at things that they want us to that they want to do. Let me start Googling where this is kind of interesting for them and expose them to those things. If we're thinking about really mapping it out, I think that the 10th grade, when your student is about 15, 16, and they're able to actually support that exploration.
Yeah.
And they're also going to let you know, I'm not really interested in college right now. My golden rule in my household that I have taken from my parents is you don't have to go to college, but you got to do something. The only way out of my house is to do something, be that vocational school, be that college. We've already let Zoe know you have to apply to a college or a vocational school. And if you say, Mom, I just want to take a year off, once you get accepted, you take your sabbatical and you explore whatever it is you need to explore. But after that year is up, if you don't have a plan, you're going to school. You're going to figure it out. And we're going to make sure that you have scholarships to do so. But really, it really is about communicating with your student of what their needs are and where they are. And if they indicate to you that the type of career that they want to have requires for them to get a degree, like being a medical doctor, then let's explore what schools are the best schools and then what schools are fits for you as a student. And those are easy things. Do they have, if you're a student of color, are students of color represented on their campus adequately? How do I know that? Are there students of color on their website? Are there professionals of color that work there that are in, decision-making roles and not just, what I like to call the entry level, the hard works, the ones that do all the work, but they're hardly ever listened to when it comes down to it, right? And really building that plan out. And it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of money. And for me, I still don't have a high-end brand pocketbook like a Louis Vuitton and all those purses. Because for me, I'm like, well, how is this going to make me money on the back end? So I like to think of things in that way. If I'm going to spend this much money, how is it going to benefit me in the long run for this to make sense? And that's the way I would like for us to think about it, as rather than this is going to be my way out of poverty, because my husband and I owned a trucking business for several years and we lived very comfortably. And that didn't require a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
let's talk
that's
about how to
okay
get
too.
into trucking for a minute. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, that is one of the more especially during COVID, that was one of the most robust business industries to be in. So let's explore that college is not the only way that we can gain economic capital, right? But if your student wants to go to college, let's make it make sense. Reach out to those colleges, make those folks do their job and actually sell their institution to you rather than just, oh, it's it's this school and it's the ivory tower, you know. Okay, but what makes it great? What really makes it great?
Mhm.
I think that's a really helpful perspective. And one thing I was thinking about is that seems at odds with the the things that people say that they go to the college for
Mm-hmm.
and what they do when they get there, right? So I remember asking a few people at one institution that I worked at, a few students, like, what made you choose this institution? And they were like, the campus is so pretty and the trees. And I was like, oh my God, you probably made a bad mistake. Like, yes, it's prestigious, the name, right? The particular institution I was at. And I was just like, this is like, what is this institution going to do for you, right? So why people end up picking institutions, I think can be very problematic. And I think that you asking those questions can really help people start to hone in on why is this particular institution, why is school right now even important for me, right? Like, am I even ready? But I think the other thing that happens when people attend college is a lot of personal development, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, am is this major going to get me access to the type of job, to the type of economic and financial setup, that I would like to have, but also community can make or break a college experience, and it can be the
Mm-hmm.
reason people leave, right? So I think that what you're saying, it seems at odds, right, with like, oh, don't just focus on the community and the diversity, right? Like, you don't just focus on that. Like, you need those things,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you are considered diverse for that campus. But you also have to figure out every step of the way how to infuse the questions you're asking. How is this institution, how is that community going to help me get there, right? It isn't just like, oh, right, like, are the parties fun? Because that's why I ended up going to the college I went to, because I thought the parties were going to be fun. And at the end of the day, I did still leverage that into a lot of professional connections, into personal development stuff that needed to happen before I could even really leverage my professional skills to go into a career and select a career. So that's just what I was thinking about. I don't think those things are at odds, but I do think that the questions that you're asking need to be infused along the way before you make the decision to go to a particular institution, and what you do while you're there.
Absolutely. I think it's both and, right? Um, and I get it that this I find a lot of times, and I'm gonna just be very honest, is particularly when I'm talking to my people, right? Um, I identify as Black and Central American, Black American and Central American. When I talk to communities of Black and Brown people, particularly the kind of community that I came from that was low socioeconomic, first gen households, it is a blow when I'm like, where's the money? And they're like, wait, what? Because
Mhm.
historically, we don't really talk about money in our communities in the way that wealthy, affluent communities do, over dinner, over cocktail, at parties, right? The first time that I went to a gala in New York, they were just casually talking about how they had like $1 million bonus at the end of the fiscal, and I was like, wait, what? And here I am, like, how am I going to make sure that I actually am able to pay both of these bills at the same time? So for me, I want my goal in having these kind of conversation too is to destigmatize folks feeling like these institutions are doing them a favor by welcoming them and their student onto their campus. Because a lot of times it is that when we talk about imposter syndrome of feeling like you don't belong, when someone shows you the cultural center on campus, it's great. I think that cultural centers are useful and then they're helpful. But also for me as a parent of a Black child, where are other Black voices being infused on this campus outside of this Black cultural center? Are they in leadership?
Nowhere.
Are they in senior roles? Are they, in policy? Is it actually being impactful where my child doesn't just have to go to this space to get community? Is there a robust faculty of Black staff, Black female staff that my child can actually utilize as mentorship, along with non-Black female community? So for me, I think that that's where my mind shifted when I started working in higher ed and in education. Really was a lot of times I felt like these institutions they saw me and they were doing me a favor, and I was lucky to be a part of them, when the reality is they're lucky to have me. They're lucky that I chose them, and they have to demonstrate and prove to me that they deserve not only me and my presence, but also potentially the debt or the money, the grants, the scholarships that I'm bringing with me to this institution as well. It's really changing that mindset, because I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Jackie, having conversations with folks who come from higher socioeconomic households where they're third and fourth and fifth generation college students, their conversations look very different than first generation students and their families. And I think that's, for me, where I want my first generation families to get at and to get to, is like, it's an honor for y'all to even be able to welcome me to your campus, because I could be somewhere else,
Look, I'm gonna jump in there because y'all, as you can see, Dr. Mahogany busting at the seams. She's like, they can't hold me. They can't hold me. She said, my presence is a present. Woo! Look, but that, like, as you're talking, I'm like, look, we got to know what's next for you, because we know you got things stirring in the pot. You probably got some irons. You about to start some businesses. So like your next thing, given your research, given the community that you build, like what do you think is that next level thing for you? What do you think is going to be next in your path?
I teeter with that question. I teeter with that question often. I think that the next role that I'm in, I think that I'm not only going to be able to be impactful with my words, but actually be impactful with the policy and the protocols that I roll out for institutions of higher education and K-12, P20 education, which is TK, transitional kindergarten, all the way through college, to really make it a program that families feel empowered and operate in the educational system in the way that it was intended to empower folks and not just leave them susceptible to whatever an institution says that they have available to them. I would like for my next role to have a sense of authoritative policy backing, where I'm actually able to be impactful in that way, because policies and budgetary lines are physical values and mission statements that organizations have. And I want to be a part of something where I'm actually able to really pour in monetarily and policy-wide for, historically marginalized communities, so that those communities and those students can thrive. I don't know if that's in higher ed. I don't know if it's in K-12. I don't know if it's in a foundation sector. But I do know that that's where the Most High in the universe is pulling me to. And really more research. I love doing research. I love hearing people's stories. I love being able to take data and create stories for folks who may not be able to see it, because they're so used to only seeing things from their own perspective and vantage point, and creating spaces of conversation and action, conversations that lead to action, to really impact. And let me backtrack. I'm not looking to impact this system. I'm looking to fully eradicate and build from this system that we know is not working in a way that benefits historically marginalized folks, because it's working the way it's meant to work. So I want to throw that out there. I want to dismantle it so that it's able to benefit those that have historically been taken advantage of and marginalized purposely. So that's a long way of saying I don't know, but tell your friends that your girl is looking for something.
Look, You ain't said nothing but a word. Dr. Jackie said, we about to tear some stuff down. Oh,
Let's do
you
it.
said my favorite words. Yeah.
Dismantle. That's my
Yeah.
word.
I'm not looking to shake no more tables. I've shaken them, and apparently,
Let's take them apart.
Yes, let's take them apart.
Yes.
Let's build something beautiful.
Well, look, I'm excited that we got to chat today.
Yes.
I think that look, I knew I was gonna get a word today, so I already knew what it was when it was coming in. Dr. Jack, you got anything else for us today?
I sure don't. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank y'all.
Look, this has been another episode. We're gonna take it to the next one, and like we always say, that's a wrap.
Peace.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. Remember, the way we build social capital is to build self and build others. We are sure you got some notes on your tablet, computer, or even using a pen and paper. Leave us a review, continue the conversation on social media at Black Social Cap, and share the show with someone you know. Until the next episode, stay motivated, rise together.